Welcome everybody on this beautiful, beautiful Friday afternoon in Ithaca. I am Maxine Morse, a representative of the class of 1945, and we are so glad to see you all here today as we, along with the class of 2005, are going to present a program for you. When we, the class of 45, were in the initial stages of planning programs for our 70th reunion, it occurred to us that we had a responsibility to address the December 7th, 1941 bombing of Pearl Harbor. That cataclysmic event, that affected every American citizen, regardless of race or ethnicity. In consultation with Kathy Hogan of the Alumni Affairs, the idea evolved into a forum with classmates participating and followed by remarks from the members of the audience. Who should be the facilitator? Elaine Engst, Cornell's archivist, was the perfect person if she were available and interested. At Cal's in Boston, I learned that the class of 2005 was interested in participating to share the effect of September 11th, 2001 that had on them at Cornell. So now here we are with our excuse me, but I've got a little Cornell humidity hoarseness. Here we are with our moderator of choice, Elaine Engst, along with two of my class of 1945 classmates and two representatives of the class of 2005. Where were you on December 7th, 1941? Or where were you on September 11th, 2001? Take it from here, Elaine. It's all yours.
Thank you, Maxine. This was really a tremendous honor to me to be asked to moderate this very, very interesting panel discussion. We have some ground rules. Each of the panelists have been asked to talk for 5 minutes. That's a really short amount of time, and I will remind them when their 5 minutes is up, so you're warned. We then will have some time for remarks from the audience, for your own reminiscences. Again, you will have only a few minutes to talk because hopefully lots of people will want to share, and we only have an hour for this session. I also might remark that on the table on the side, there is a photocopy. We do have the original, but it was too fragile to bring, of the Cornell Daily Sun special edition for December 7th, 1941, which was part of a newspaper that was produced on Saturday. The Sun didn't produce a Sunday edition. There is also a yearbook from 1943 and 1945, and if you take a look through that, you can see how different the campus was over those years. And we also have some photographs and other memorabilia from Bernard Mayerson from the class of 45, and he'll be happy to tell people about the items that are on the second table. So at the end of the session, we'll have time for him to tell some of his stories. But I don't want to take any more of the panelists' time, so what I will do is introduce the 4 speakers and then let them tell their stories. And our first speaker is Thelma Emile Hunter, who graduated from the College of Arts and Sciences. And after graduating, she moved to Rochester when her husband went to medical school. And she got an MA and an artist diploma from the Eastman School of Music. They then moved to Minnesota, where Sam received an internship in surgery at the University Hospital, and she was appointed to the piano faculty at the university. She had many opportunities to perform in chamber music groups with colleagues from the Minneapolis Symphony, as well as soloing at them and recitals in the region. And she writes, Nothing has changed. I'm still there, though not on the faculty, still performing, and along the way, we raised 6 sons. So that's a very impressive resume. Jack Rogers came to Cornell in 1941, following his father's footsteps. And after a stint in the Army, he returned to Cornell, graduating with a degree in civil engineering in 1949 and an MBA in 1950. And Jack, who was from New Jersey, fell in love with Ithaca and stayed. At Cornell, he was a football star and swimmer, a member of Kappa Sigma and Quill and Dagger. He worked for the Alumni Fund here on campus, coached the first Cornell sailing team, and served as the engineer for the village of Cayuga Heights for 30 years. He also married a Cornell classmate who was also apparently his first love from first grade, and they had 3 children, 2 of whom were Cornellians. From the class of 2005, and I think it's really nice, we have tremendous representation of the colleges. Mark Eskenazi graduated with a degree from the ILR school in 2005. As an undergraduate, he was an ears counselor and a member of the Cornell policy debate team. In 2008, he graduated from Georgetown Law School and since then has practiced labor and employment law in both the public and private sectors. For several years, he was a litigator for the National Labor Relations Board and argued cases in federal courts across the country. And he currently practices at a law firm in Washington, D.C., and he and his wife live in Arlington, Virginia. And our last panelist, Eliza Wasserman, graduated from the College of Human Ecology. So again, we have 4 colleges represented, and holds both an MPH and an MS in food policy from Tufts University. She's worked in public health policy advocacy since 2009 and currently works in Washington, D.C. on policies to improve access to affordable, healthy, local food for low-income communities across the country. A recent transplant from Massachusetts, Eliza previously worked to advance racial health equity in Boston through state and city policy, and she attributes much of her passion for food systems and racial justice to her undergraduate service work with the Cornell Farm Worker Program. So, without further, Thelma, 5 minutes.
Oh dear. I have no idea what I can say for 5 minutes.
And you're welcome to stay seated or to stand, whichever is most comfortable.
Will it pick it up?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Seated is fine. I wonder how many of you will admit to the naivete I had when I first heard the news in Sage. Someone came running into the restroom where we all were gathered, said, Pearl Harbor has been bombed by the Japanese. And I thought, I heard bomb, that's bad. By the Japanese, that's bad. But where is Pearl Harbor? You know, I think people growing up in New York or in the East Coast are at a great disadvantage. We have myopic vision. The West was Chicago. And Pearl Harbor was, frankly, an unknown. Is anybody else in that same situation? Oh, good. Good. Of course, we found out sooner than later what it was all about. But the lack of awareness of the world was something hard to swallow, and I realized I was in that situation. Some of us have long-distance memories. I hope all of you do, because I would be so happy for your reflections on that period of time. I don't seem to be able to pick up on little things to make a memory, whereas 9/11, with television and with all the coverage, it's so vivid in our minds. But in 1941, it was all verbal and a little hard to get a handle on it until you saw it in print. But what happened on the campus, the male population almost dissolved overnight. The men were so eager and felt obligated compelled to sign up as soon as possible. And so the men evaporated. They were just not there. We lived, several of us girls, in a fraternity one of the last years that we were here, and I forget the name of it. I don't think it's even there anymore. Right at the entrance to College Town. There was a beautiful fraternity, but it was women who were in there. And when very soon after I got to know some of the new faculty at the University of Minnesota, one of the new composers said, I was at Cornell. I said, what? You were at Cornell? He was with the language school, the Russian language school that was here. He was from Latvia, so he spoke Russian and he spoke several languages, and that was his expertise. And he said it was a very active school at the time. And all these handsome dudes in their dark uniforms, I think they were all Navy, ASTP, Navy. And the local women with whom we were friendly said, you have to be very careful when you date those guys. Don't wear anything Angora, because it'll get all over their uniforms. they'll hate you from then on. So I heard a lot about that situation from him and how well run that was, what an experience, a very rich experience to be on this campus studying Russian, which he already knew, but nevertheless, that's what happened. I'm trying to think of what else. Oh, the library tower, as I remember, was blacked out. And I don't know who they were worried about would come over. So we missed that. It's such an iconic thing here to see that library tower lighted, but it was dark. Where I grew up on Staten Island, it made good sense to be dark because we lived right on the Narrows, looking over to Brooklyn, and there were all sorts of ships, convoys, everything else going by. So we all had to black out our windows along there. That makes sense. But the Live Tower in Ithaca, I could never quite, couldn't understand that. But I'd be so happy when your time comes, if anybody else remembers, right on this campus at that particular weekend. My memory stops just about there, but I bet you have a good one.
No.
Jack. Return.
Thelma and my sister were classmates, and my sister was 2 years ahead of me. And we followed in our father's footsteps here. He was in the class of the famous class of 1916. And on Pearl Harbor Day, I remember walking to the fraternity for the evening meal, and Kappa Sigma fraternity, 800 University Avenue, and heard the news, and really, you said, well, this is not too much Japan. It's such a small country that it really doesn't make sense. And really, the war, we realized that we had to participate. There was quite a bit, at the time before Pearl Harbor, there was a big wave of thought in the country of isolationism. It said, all right, Europe is having a war again. Let them fight it out over there, and we won't worry about it. But after Pearl Harbor, the everybody that I knew was signing up. And I signed up and expected to get called up right away, but they deferred me and let me finish my sophomore year before they did call me up. And I wanted to be in the Army Engineers because I was in the engineering school, thought I could get some good experience there. But this is what they sat you down in boot camp there after they pulled us in and said, well, what branch do you want to be? And I said, Army Engineers, so they put me in the field artillery. What I remember about the campus in those days, we used to sing a lot. There's a gentleman over here at the end of the first row that I was at some meeting yesterday and he burst out into song. And one of the hangovers who were singing for us to sing a special crew song. But just reminded me we had we sang in the fraternity at dinner time and after dinner time, and it seemed to and there were songs of the crew, fight songs for the football team, and there was song of the classes, and I don't see or hear that much singing on the campus as there used to be, which is a shame. It's too bad. The other things I remember on the campus is how many of you remember skating on BB Lake? How many of you went through the ice on BB Lake? I did. Remember the toboggan slide? There used to be a toboggan slide down there that they went tearing down, but they closed it off because of injuries or what have you. And I managed to climb halfway up, which was the structure was still there, and slide down on ice skates. But I got going too fast, went out to the thin ice, and went through the ice. It was a first date I had with my wife here at Cornell. I knew her long before. Are you coming over? Give me the hook.
You finished the story.
You're going to give me the hook here. Anyway, it was my first date, and he said, oh, gosh, here goes the first date. I got to go home. So I walked her home and then walked back to my room. But it was so cold that my pants froze, so there was some ice there that I didn't allow the wind in, so it wasn't too bad. It wasn't too bad.
And she married you anyway.
Well, I was on the swimming team. Does anybody remember the swimming pool, the old swimming pool that was in the old armory? Well, it was something. It was the smallest little pool that you could imagine, and but they turned out some good swim teams there, and what's that? Scotty Little was the coach. Scotty Little was the coach then. Scotty Little for many years, right? And I was good friends with Scotty Little and his family. And the last, well, that was after the war. during the war, when I got called up, I didn't hear much about the changes there. My wife stayed on here. She wasn't my wife at that time. She finished up year early, took advanced courses, et cetera, et cetera. She said, well, the men have all gone, and they found that she was thinking about signing up to go in the Marines, as some of the girls. I talked her out of it. But the campus didn't have a building in every open space as they do now. It's amazing. Some of you are back for the first time. The first thing that hits you is that they have put buildings where used to be open space. Thank goodness they haven't cluttered up the library slope or the arts quadrangle with buildings yet. But let's hope they don't. All right.
Mark, who is wearing, I must say, one of the blazers from our extensive collection of Cornell blazers. So.
That's why I wanted to speak. I just wanted to wear the blazer. But thank you all for being here, and to Maxine, Kathy, Elaine, and Jack and Thelma for putting this on. I'm originally from New York, so for me, 9/11 really hit close to home. I'm from Queens and Long Island originally, and my father worked at the time in New York City in Union Square. And you have to remember, at this time in 9/11, it was September. I was a freshman, we were freshmen, and it was my second week of school. Orientation week just happened the week before, and we were just starting classes, and I thought I had everything on track. I was in the ILR school, and I really wanted to study labor relations and unions and law, and I thought I was raring to go. Early in freshman year, about the second week is when 9/11 happened. I was actually walking to class near the ILR school, near Ives Hall. I was walking to Economics 101, and my best friend rushed me down and said, oh my gosh, like 2 planes just went into the World Trade Center. And I said, oh, was it an accident? What is that? It's 2 planes. It can't be an accident. And we were really confused. We didn't know what happened. And talking about communications, I had just gotten a cell phone maybe 6 months before. My parents wanted me to be ready, so I had this Motorola StarTAC phone. It was this black phone. It's like the size of a car battery at the time. It was like huge. So I pulled out my phone and I called my mom, who was crying. She was working in Queens at the time, and she was just really upset, and she said numerous times throughout the years, I remember her saying, I'm really glad you're up there, that you're in Ithaca, it's away, it's safe, and I'm really glad you're there. And I was really glad to hear her voice. And then I tried to call my father, who was working in Union Square. I kept getting the all lines busy. I don't know if you guys remember that, if anyone remembers when they were trying to call New York. And I kept getting this all lines busy because I guess people were trying to call. Finally got in touch with him. Thank God he was okay. And my aunt and uncle actually lived in Battery Park at the time, and my uncle was home, and he actually saw the towers go down. He saw them fall with his own eyes. But anyway, there on campus, we went to this economics class after I spoke to my mom, and there was a lot of milling around in the class, a lot of confusion, but they went ahead with the class. I don't think it might have been about 8:50, 9 o'clock. I don't think all the news was out yet. And then I continued on to MVR, the MVR building where human ecology is. There was a tiny little TV. This wouldn't even happen today, ever. But there was a tiny little TV in a cafe, and there were about 50, 60 students standing around it watching the news and getting the reports. It wouldn't happen today because we would all be on our phones or on the computer or something. But we were around this little TV, and people were just shocked and confused. I really remember going on with that day, I remember going back to the dorms. I lived in Clara Dixon Hall, and people were huddled around talking about it. And at night, President Bush addressed the nation on television, and there were about at least 100 people in the lounge just watching. You could hear a pin drop, just very frightened. But, you know, I really remember a lot of debate in the classes. There was a lot of sadness and confusion, but I remember a lot of debate about issues, world issues, almost immediately. I had a body and mind class, which was a mandatory phys ed class where we normally did yoga and talked about feelings and ooey gooey things. And we went to this class, I think it was the day after 9/11, and people were talking about the Middle East and terrorist groups and Israel, the role of Israel in the world. And there was a whole lot of debate. I had an English class where, you know, we had heavy debate in the class, and I think that was ultimately a good thing. There was a lot of discussion, a lot of debate in those classes. And, you know, I really felt unified as a country, as an American. You know, I really felt proud that day and throughout that year. I felt like we could get through this and be one. And the years passed, and my mom, who's both my parents are very protective. You know, my mom always said, "I'm glad you're up there." She knew from before I went to school that I wanted to study abroad. I really wanted to go to Switzerland. There was a new program that ILR was rolling out where you could work for the UN for a semester in labor law, international labor law. And there was a drumbeat from '01 to '04 where I was getting her prepared and getting her into it, but she didn't really want me to go. And I ended up going because I just felt like I didn't want, you know, the fear to run my life, which was a big concept that was going on, I guess, then and probably now too. You don't want them to ruin it for you. So I went, and there, by that time in 2004, I didn't feel the unified American vibe anymore. I worked and studied with German students, Korean students from all over the world, and they were anti-American might be strong, but they were very upset about the world actions of the U.S. after 9/11, and there was even more heated debate than here on campus. But I guess I'll stop now. I really like to hear everyone's thoughts, and thank you all for coming.
Eliza.
Thanks. Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm really excited to hear from everybody. Being from Long Island, I rarely spend time in New York now, but as a child, the New York City skyline was really just so familiar to me. I really took it for granted, and I felt really connected to it. As a civil engineer, my father had worked in the World Trade Center for 12 years in Tower 1 for when the planes hit on September 11th. And this, as Mark said, was our second week as freshmen, and I was majoring in human development. I spent a lot of my liberal arts optional credits taking music theory that year. And so Lincoln Hall is where I was when the first version of the news caught up with me. While waiting to enter my music theory musicianship section, I heard people chatting in the hallway. Somebody said, a plane hit the Twin Towers, and no one really was that worried. I thought, oh, like it must be a tiny plane that accidentally skimmed the antenna. I don't think it occurred to any of us that could possibly happen intentionally. And so, to be honest, yeah, I wasn't really worried. But knowing that my dad worked there, I figured, I did also have a cell phone at the time, but I figured, let me not bother him. They probably at least have evacuated the building, and it's probably, an annoying work day, chaotic, like I don't want to contribute extra, concern. So I was, pretty protected in this safe academic bubble. It felt pretty far away. I didn't know that 6 hours away there was this big game of telephone going on between my mother, my father, various other family members, and that just 6 hours away. So my dad had exited the subway at the building. He was half an hour late to work that day because it was the Democratic primary and he had been voting. And he well, so he tried to exit the subway, but there was this mob of people running into the train platform from the concourse. And so he thought this was the opposite direction of the usual flow of traffic. And so he thought there was like a bomb in the concourse or something like that. So he rushed out the other exit with all these people. And he looked up outside and saw people jumping out of the building. And he thought they were his coworkers, his friends. And he just he ran uptown. He didn't stop running. Even when he heard a big noise, he didn't look back, which was the second plane hitting. He didn't see it, fortunately. And he just went and hung out in another office building that they were actually praying in there. It was further uptown, but still downtown. That was like a little bit out of the immediate vicinity. And so I, since it was basically the first week of class, I had actually shared my class schedule with my parents, and so fortunately, my dad was able to get in touch with my mom really quickly, shortly after, and let her know that he was okay. And since she had my class schedule, the cell phones were already jammed up at that point. But she was able to figure out that I was in Lincoln Hall, and so here I was sitting in this musicianship. Very excruciatingly difficult ear training class, sort of a little worried, but not that worried, to be honest. And my mother had spoken to Ann Tillman, who was the person used to run Lincoln Hall, and she agreed to come find me in my class. And so she opened the door and said, your dad's okay. But I still didn't really know what had happened. I was like, oh, okay, good, he's okay. But I didn't know what to be worried about. And I was really still safe in this class. And it wasn't until I left that class that I went on to the art squad, and then there were sort of mobs of people milling around, and I found out what actually happened and was standing with a big group of people outside the campus store watching this big TV. And I think all my classes were canceled the rest of the day, and we kind of just went back to our dorms, I remember, and everyone was just gathered together in the lounge. I was in Court Hall, which was brand new that year, and just watching, glued to our seats, glued to the TV. It was weird being new in the dorm. I was just meeting everyone else in the dorm, and I had this, very personal connection that my dad had been working there, and I had all these memories of being in the building, going to work with my dad, going to the top, which I think people were sort of riveted to asking me all these questions of, could I believe what was going on? And I didn't know what to make of it, but I resonate with what Mark said about feeling, my family was really glad that I was here, sort of safely removed from New York City. And I think I feel like I was very lucky. I was lucky that I didn't really have to worry about my dad, that I knew he was okay before I actually knew what happened. And that, being here, not being in the New York City area, I was protected. I could go about my education. I could go about my daily business without any kind of significant interruption. And I think, just to say, I think that since I was lucky, I think that was what enabled me to get involved later on. There was a lot of activity, as Mark said, on campus around, first there was sort of this collective mourning period, a number of events in Sage Chapel, people trying to just band together, and I won't get too much into the aftermath, but just form a community together. I think it did bring people together, especially our class. And then after that, there was a lot of political activity around the U.S. reaction to September 11th and the wars that followed. And I think the fact that I was so lucky in being protected from that day's events enabled me to get involved, to write a lot of articles, to get involved in a lot of marches that happened both here and in other cities in the United States, really trying to make sure that as Americans, we felt good about the response that our government was pursuing in response to September 11th.
I'm going to do Any of you have questions of the other panelists before we throw it open to the audience? Is there anything that you would like amplified that any of you have said?
If I can ask a question of them.
Sure, please.
Yeah, well, I was talking to Thelma beforehand. I'm a big FDR buff. You know, I think he's great. Did people what was the reaction to him and his speeches on the radio? And did people really feel like he was going to lead the country in the right way?
Some people did. My parents didn't. They were absolutely dyed-in-the-wool Republicans. And New York was pretty corrupt at that time with Tammany Hall, so that was their rationale. When we moved to Minnesota, we became Democrats right away. There was Hubert Humphrey and, all the good guys accomplishing something so important. But the ones who were already enthusiastic about FDR, I think, feel that his fireside chats were very meaningful and drew the country together. I think he really rallied people around that.
Yes, sir. We're going to give you a mic. So
I guess I was 20 at the time. I was here at Cornell, and I was an absolute FDR enthusiast because I think the guy, I knew he was going to do the right thing, and he absolutely did, with the one exception of putting Japanese Americans in jail. That I was against. But outside of that, I was absolutely for him, and most of the young people at my age were exactly the same way. We thought that he was a fantastic leader, and whether we were Republicans or Democrats at the time, we thought FDR would do the right thing, and he certainly did. Don't forget another thing. I personally was not born in this country. I was born in Vienna, Austria. I came to the United States when I was 15, and I knew that FDR was definitely going to do something against Hitler, and he certainly did. So I was absolutely convinced he would do the right thing, and he did.
as somebody who was not an American citizen, how did Pearl Harbor affect you?
Well, the same as the Americans.
Okay.
I went to war.
You went to war,
Don't
okay.
forget, I went to, no, I was totally Americanized by that time. Yeah.
Doesn't take long.
The moment I stepped on American soil, I became an American. No question about that.
Okay.
And I still am. But the point is that I just had the faith in, because of the fireside chats and the way he was talking about Hitler and about everything else, and I was convinced that he would do the right thing. And in my opinion, he absolutely did. Maybe other people were not the same way, but I thought it was.
Okay, yes.
I was wondering if anyone on the panel or anyone in the audience could discuss whether there was a change in either attitude or relationships between Cornell students who were, quote, American born, and then other students that were either Japanese or German or other ancestry, or at the time of 2001, September 11th, if there was any change in that year, with students of Muslim ancestry, if there was, if you noticed that.
Thought about that. I have to say I did not know too many foreign students when I was here. I was stuck at the piano. And but I remember being horrified when I heard that the Japanese Americans, whom I knew from New York, were sent to internment camps. I mean, that was horrific, and disturbed me for many years after that. But at the time, I don't remember any strong feelings one way or another.
I don't remember any anti-Muslim actions or speaking on campus when I was here. One thing I do remember, I was on the debate team here, and there was a fellow debater who was Muslim, and the debate coach always said, the federal government, the CIA, is going to want you to, because you speak Arabic, and he going to want you to be recruited to help and join the cause, because I think they were looking, and maybe still are looking, for translators or whatnot. So I remember that, but I don't remember any anti-Muslim. I know that around the country there might have been, but not here on campus. I didn't remember any of that.
In the 40s, there would have been a very small number of international students here. There was a Japanese student who actually, from New Jersey, whose family were not citizens, and they were deported. And he was actually, there's an interview with him that you can find online. Came back and graduated from Cornell, and is a very enthusiastic alumnus, but in fact, during the war, his family really was sent back. He lived in New Jersey. This wasn't somebody from the West Coast.
Hi, Elaine. My father was class of 31 and did serve in the Army, and a whole different set of circumstances when I was here in 62 to 66. But one of the things my father was talking about was no sense of when the war might end. And that he was a physician, he was an obstetrician, he was, that was the role he played in the Army as well, and he was an officer. But in essence said you were putting your career on hold, and this is what you were going to do. You know, a lot of marriages just before you were shipped overseas and so forth. I wondered also, because my daughter was obviously is younger, and I wondered how much her future feelings about hope and having children would be affected by 9/11. And I just wondered from the class of 45 what your feelings were and what your feelings at 2005 were about future. And I don't mean that in a mushy way. I really mean career choices, as you were talking about, or in the class of 45, what you thought you might be doing how many years later. Was it going to be 4 years, 5 years? You know, was the war what you were going to do until such time as forever might come and it might end?
And please, the other members of the class chime in. But yes, any thoughts on that?
Many of our friends in the dorm got married to their boyfriends because they were going overseas. And then they followed them to the camps, wherever they were, came back to the dorm and fit right in from before, but now they were married. Some of them had children, but not too often. Mostly they just wanted to get married. And so did my husband and I. I had a boyfriend in high school who preceded me here by 2 years. He was a big shot basketball player at Cornell. And all of a sudden, when the war came along, he was sent or was kept in medical school because they needed doctors. So he was never in the service in that sense of the word, but in the regular Army. Why not get married? We were getting paid by the Army. So at the very end of my college years, we got married and went to University of Rochester and did that thing. But so many of our classmates were married that it just seemed to be the thing to do.
Anybody else want to? Thoughts on that? Yeah. You want to hear a story? Sure, that's what we're here for. Wait for the mic here.
Pearl Harbor was a sorority sister in Syracuse.
Okay. Other questions, comments?
Hello,
Oh, okay.
in the back, very
Yes,
back.
yes.
Hi, I'm also class of 05. As a Muslim student, when 9/11 hit, I remember watching President Bush's speech on television that evening, and we were all hooked to our television, and every word he said, I was trying to analyze it and go through it. And I remember that night we all did feel very united, and we totally backed the president after his speech. But when the war against Iraq happened, I remember Ithaca made national news with a lot of Cornell students protesting against the war. And I also remember his second election when I was on campus, and I have to say it was one of the days that struck me the most because nobody said a word after he was reelected. It was almost like somebody had died that day. And I think being at the Cornell campus, and I'm from Georgia in the US, what we experienced was something that was very unique to Ithaca. And I never felt like anybody was against me because I was a Muslim student. Never happened. I had a lot of Jewish friends, a lot of Christian friends, and we organized events together, and we exchanged a lot of thoughts, and I knew a lot about Judaism and about Christianity, and I mean, the years I spent here were just amazing. And I think all of us would say the same thing, all of us Muslim students. But I think the fear was there, the fear of what would have happened, what may happen. We were on campus with a lot of resources. We have a wonderful Near Eastern Studies department, wonderful professors who gave a lot of talks throughout campus on Islam, and I was just afraid, unfortunately, because of a lot of the lack of knowledge throughout the country, what it would translate to for those of us Muslim Americans. And unfortunately, we still see and feel the impact today. I work for the US government. I'm a foreign service officer, and I am proud to be representing this nation abroad. But sometimes it's difficult when I hear people on television in this country say things like, we don't have any Muslim allies, and that say that Islam is the problem. When, as a Muslim American representing this nation abroad, serving in Muslim nations, and we try to give them a very different picture of America, it's sometimes heartbreaking. But yeah, the years I had here were absolutely amazing. Thank you.
Okay. We probably have time for maybe one or two more questions. One of the things that about the people from 45, what was your parents' reaction? I mean, we know for 2005, they had cell phones. They could call their mom and dad. Up until that time, people called their parents once a week, maybe, and maybe you called them collect and they accepted the charges or not. People remember that. But how this happened on a Sunday? Maybe a number of you were calling your parents. What was it like? Ah, okay.
I'm in the class of 45, and I remember I was sitting all curled up in my chair in Risley studying, and they broke in from the New York Philharmonic and announced about Pearl Harbor. And across the hall from me was a girl whose parents were refugees, first from Germany and then from Holland. And she immediately got on the phone and called her parents in New York. And it was interesting because she spoke 7 languages. And when she'd get on the phone, everybody in the corridor would listen because she could curse in 7 different languages. And that's how she talked to her parents. And then during the war, Maxine and I were both co-chairman of the War Bonds and the Stamps Committee.
Right.
And we made corsages out of the stamps. And the boys, when they went to dances, would buy the stamp corsages in place of flowers. And then recently, when you just mentioned coming back to school, another one of our classmates was married to a young man who was called into service, and she left. She came back later and went back to school here, and she graduated at the age of 77. She completed her education,
It's never too late.
so it's never too late.
Maxine?
Succinctly, I lived in Risley also, and I was walking across the bridge to go to the library to study on Sunday afternoon. Some people won't believe that, but it's true. And some students came running across the bridge toward us and yelling, "The Japs bombed Pearl Harbor." And exactly as you heard from my classmates, we knew what the Japanese were, but who knew what or where Pearl Harbor was? So we ran back to the dorm and turned the radio on, and that's how we found out. The answer to your second question is, my parents called me just to reassure me to see how I was, and they felt that I was safe, which was important to them. You had another question that I think was very interesting that you had posed with me, which was, I'd like to address just briefly, for those younger people here, everybody wanted to go to that war. And I know it's a very different environment in which some of you were brought up, particularly in light of the Vietnam War and all. But as Jock explained, and Elma and Thelma did, both of them told you, we all felt we had to go and fight. There wasn't any question. People who weren't eligible or didn't get drafted or couldn't be accepted in one of the training programs really felt kind of out of it, because the right thing to do was to go and sign up and serve. Will my classmates agree about that? It was patriotic. It was the thing that you did. And just as an aside, and a pitch for Cornell, I think that all of you alums and our guests should know that here at Cornell, we had more training programs than any other college in the United States. It's true, we were overrun with them, and we had to move off the sidewalks when we heard them coming in back of us. But Cornell really was a great, great supporter and provided wonderful training to the Army, the Navy, and the Marines.
Okay. Yes, sir. We have somebody in the second row.
George Karp, class of 45, December 7th, 1941. I was in my rooming house on the Knoll in Cayuga Heights, and the person I was next to was Barney Mayers. And we're still sitting next to each other.
Well, and that's a perfect segue. I'm just going to make a few comments. One, I want to invite you all tomorrow to Kroc Library. We have our famous show and tell, where we get out many, many interesting things from the collection, including scrapbooks from the class of 45 and from the class of 2005, as well as from the class of 1915. So please come, 10:30 to 5, all day long. You don't need an appointment. That's downstairs in Kroc Library. Also, please take a look at what's on the table. Barney Marison is here, and he can explain to people the pictures that he has on the table to my right here. So if you have a chance, and if you want to come down and talk to any of the people personally, I'm happy to do so. I'll also put in a little bit of a plug. There is the book Cornell History 1940 to 2015 that Glenn Altshuler and Isaac Kramnik did, that talks about, again, what it was like here on campus in that period of time. So thank you all for coming, and as I say, please come and look at the yearbooks, look at the Sun, interesting story about that, and talk to Barney about his pictures. Thank you so much.